And again, I talk about bifurcation, and these are different images of bifurcation. 1, 2, and 3 are examples of bifurcation in blood vessels, the branches of trees, and in dendrites of neurons. And the last image shows the bifurcations that characterize the evolution of the human species. Human history is actually a series of bifurcations. For example, the history of the great religions. We remember, let me remember my date. 1400 years ago, the Islam split into the Sunni and the Shia sects, something which still reverberates to this day. 1053, oh, I remember that date. 1053, the Great Schism, which split the church. Oh, again, familiar sights. Pandemonium breaks loose when a flock of migrating geese takes off. But seconds later, we see this beautiful sight of the V formation of migrant birds. Again, pandemonium breaks loose here immediately after the attack of a predator, but then the school of herring re-emerges later on in the familiar defensive formations. This continuous transformation, incidentally, take place in all systems, and they are said to be out of equilibrium. Out of equilibrium, meaning to say that complex systems do not tend to settle permanently into a permanent state. They just keep on emerging. Oh, metamorphosis, we learned about this in grade 4, but now we know better. We know that the emergence doesn't end with the butterfly, because we know that the flutter of the wings of a butterfly will, at some point in time, somewhere in the globe, affect weather conditions. Oh, from the physical world, we have emergence. Let me just illustrate this by these images. In the physical world, 1, 2, I believe this is the chaos that results from the collision of 2 white dwarfs. I'm no physicist, but I'm sure those who took up GE still remember what the white dwarfs are. And the resultant image is that of supernova. The next picture is that of the rapid expansion of the nebula, which eventually emerged 4.5 billion years as the planetary system. And then swarm behavior. Just to illustrate, give examples of swarm behavior. Crowds, of course, mob mentality, a colony of ants, and these are swarm robots. Now, all swarm phenomena tell us how, from simple adaptive behavior at the individual level, there will tend to emerge coherent, rational, and intelligent behavior at the aggregate level. Oh, well, this is a cone snail, I think, studied by Toto Oliveira. And what Toto found out about cone snails is that they tend to develop a wide arsenal of defensive mechanisms so that they can handle the equally wide divergences of challenges or threats from its environment. The same phenomenon applies in complex social systems. All right, the next several slides will be about emergence in social organizations. In particular, the impact of modern information and communication technology. Transition to emergent era of postmodernity. What I mean here, Michael, correct me if I'm wrong. What I mean here is that modern communication technology has accelerated the pace of transition from modern to the postmodern era. mainly by interconnecting like-minded people in huge networks of interacting individuals, right, who are able to somehow avoid having to be part of institutions in order to interconnect with themselves, right? So what the resultant is a system where, in a manner of speaking, society has been de-institutionalized, right? Institutions have tended to lose their relevance to, especially the young, the new millennials, for example. They find company with each other without the benefit of intermediating institutions. Emerging patterns of democratization. Well, the revolution that's going on in the Middle East, of course, is the result of social networks, in which new political institutions emerge, virtual institutions emerge, that function without the benefit of formal leaders, the benefit of any formal governance mechanisms. And then in economic production, and so on and so forth, I made reference to big data and to analytics and other research procedures which enable us to have a grip on complex systems as they emerge. But I also mentioned earlier that no matter how good our understanding of the system is, we cannot predict the system at any point in time in the future. Having said that, this gives us a window of opportunity to nudge institutions gently into preferred directions or away from impending disaster. This is, I think, the gist of my message in terms of implications of complexity and evolutionary theories on institutional change. This gives us a window of opportunity to nudge institutions, think UP, gently into preferred directions or away from impending disaster. Strategy has thus become less a matter of putting in place a well-articulated program of action and more of establishing the necessary institutional conditions that would allow the social system to move where they want them to be. With a minimum, take note, with a minimum of potentially disruptive human intervention. A phrase which I've been using earlier on, which raised some hackles among some of my colleagues. Now, the way to change institutions, in my thinking, forgive me for another extra minute, is not to directly alter certain variables, because this could be potentially disruptive. Rather, and I don't know if Bott and Mike will agree with me, maybe the best way to change institutions is to attempt to establish a culture that gives, I'm wrapping up, that gives the institution the agility and to adapt on its own, again with a minimum of administrative manipulation. Now, this culture, organizational culture, has certain characteristics, and they are as shown on my slide. Emphasis on peer rather than authority relationships. A culture of trust, high tolerance for ambiguity, and greater willingness to assume risks. Incentive systems that stress overall results rather than individual performance. And finally, governance mechanisms that co-align social, organizational, and individual interests. These are the characteristics of what are known as learning organizations. They are also known as complex adaptive systems. And I think, skipping the last two slides, if we can make transform UP, Mr. President, into a flexible, adaptive organization that changes with a minimum of interference. If we only allow the different individuals to be able to interact more freely with one another, I think we will have the beginnings of an institutional change. Otherwise, I am inclined to say some very, very negative descriptions of our beloved university. In my thinking, the university has become moribund. It has become maladaptive. I used the word moribund, maladaptive. I used that word before, earlier, and I think Giselle sort of agreed with it, Mr. President. Moribund is a very negative term. It suggests death, for God's sake. No. Maybe if I continue on. My observation is this. I think it can be argued that the concentration of intellectual power on the Diliman campus is greater than anywhere else in the region. I think you will have to agree with me. However, my own observation and that of others is that we have not succeeded in melding into a coherent, productive institution. So much so that we have the very unpalatable situation where the whole is actually less than the sum of the parts. Complexity theory tells us otherwise. It should be otherwise, that the whole should be greater than the sum of the individual parts. Maybe our insights from complexity theory and evolutionary theory will enable us to goad our university to become more adaptive, more flexible, more productive, and become a truly important catalyst for change in our society. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Nick.